Hello and welcome to the second episode of this solo chess series in which you can try and guess the moves of some of the greatest chess players throughout history. So this game took place in 1892 with Wilhelm Steinitz playing the black pieces in a world championship game in 1892 in Cuba. And so anyway, he played against Mikhail Chigorin. And so what you want to do when you're going over master games, it's better to try and calculate and think and get into the mindset of the player instead of just passively going through the moves. So pretend that you're Steinitz here. What would you do? His opponent begins with e4 here. So what do you think Steinitz would do? And I'll just go through the moves quickly, and you can go ahead and try and figure them out. And then afterwards, we can do a quick game review and analysis. All right. So do you have Steinitz's response here? All right. E5. And now Chigorin plays knight to f3, attacking the pawn. And what should Steinitz do next? Knight to c6. And then we have bishop to c4, the Italian game. How does Steinitz respond to this? Bishop to c5. And if at any time you want to think further, just pause the video. And I'll kind of go through these a little bit faster now. The Evans Gambit is played here with the b pawn moving forward. What does Steinitz do? He captures, accepting the gambit. The response is c3. So you give up the b pawn in order to push c3, chasing the bishop back. And now white makes another move here. Goes ahead and castles. And d6 is played by Steinitz. So his opponent responds with pushing the pawn in the center, which is now fortified by the c pawn. And what does Steinitz do now? He develops a piece, pinning this knight with the bishop to the queen. And now we have a counter pin, pinning this knight to the king. But he is moving a piece twice in the opening, and generally you don't want to do that. So how does Steinitz respond? He just attacks in the center, ignoring this pin on his knight. So we have a counter, a recapture of the pawn, obtaining this ideal pawn center here. And what does Steinitz do here? All right, now we have this retreat by Steinitz, and the computer says that's a mistake there. So hopefully you picked something better, and we'll take a look at that in the game review and analysis. All right, moving on. The bishop is developed here, protecting the central pawn, lining up through the middle and down towards the unprotected g pawn and the rook here on the king side. What should Steinitz do now? And there's also a possible threat of pushing this pawn, attacking the knight, and then picking this pawn off and capturing the trapped rook. All right, we have a knight move just jumping up here, blocking the path of the bishop. And here, an interesting move. Chigorin develops his knight to the edge of the board. And, maybe from there he can reposition towards the center, maybe even moving here and attacking the bishop. So in response, what should Steinitz do here? A capture of this unprotected pawn. And now the plan is followed through here. The pawn pushes forward, attacking this knight, and unleashing a discovered attack by the bishop down through the center of the board and attacking this pawn. Although now if that pawn is taken, the rook could just move and chase that bishop away. So the knight retreats back, which is given an exclamation mark for a great move because it can kind of help protect the king here in case this pawn, or excuse me, this knight up here is attacked and would be pinned to the king. Now this knight is free, more free to move. All right, a queen move, adding pressure to this bishop. So now the king would not want a castle, or this bishop could be captured here. And a counterattack by Steinitz, attacking the bishop, preventing it from capturing this pawn, although that might not be a good idea, because if this pawn were captured, the rook could move to the g file and aim down here towards the king. All right, the rook is protected, and what should Steinitz do next? He captures, we have a recapture, and now what does Steinitz do? Well, he retreats his knight back, protecting this b pawn that the rook is lining up on, but at the same time attacking the queen. Chigorin centralizes his queen, getting it out of the attack of that knight. And now Steinitz has to figure out what his next plan will be. All right, he castles his king to safety. And now we have this retreat of the bishop to help protect this pawn. And Steinitz moves forward, attacking the queen here. So the queen retreats. And what does Steinitz do for a follow-up here? All right, he develops his queen, keeping an eye on this rook, forcing the queen to protect this rook. And now his rooks are connected, and he'll be able to move them into the game, probably on this open e file here. So this bishop retreat is made here, which helps protect this knight, I guess. It kind of blocks the e file some. So let's see what Steinitz does here. Well, he starts to take control of the e file. And his opponent retreats this knight, which is not doing much on the rim, but then he retreats it back to the edge of the board, hoping to reposition it back into the game. So now Steinitz gets ready to double his rooks. So hopefully you found that move. The knight jumps up here, getting back towards the center of the board, protecting this pawn, helping control this square, maybe to prevent the knight from jumping up here and harassing the queen. And what should Steinitz do here? Well, he follows up with his plan of doubling up the rooks. So hopefully you found that. And now we have the bishop retreating back to prevent future harassing moves, maybe of the rooks trying to get on the 7th rank. Although that's not possible now with the rook and the queen and the knight all guarding. So Steinitz plays this interesting move here. Knight to h4, maybe trying to get rid of this defending knight. And so his opponent ignores that and counterattacks with his rook here, forcing this knight to make a decision. And instead of capturing, the rook repositions here where it can jump into the game in a different angle. So let's see how the game continues. The bishop repositions now, helping prevent this knight from jumping forward. Maybe just moving to a better diagonal, aiming at the king side here. All right, so we have a5. So that may have been a little more difficult move to find, but attacking the rook, forcing this rook to make a decision here. And the rook stays in the center of the board here, keeping an eye on this e4 square to prevent that knight from jumping forward. So, and keeping an eye on the pawn. All right, the queen jumps up, or not, yeah, the queen. The bishop jumps up in front of the queen, attacking white's bishop. So the opponent responds with a retreating move to the edge of the board. Well, I guess a forward retreat, a sideways retreat, aiming at the bishop here. Or excuse me, using the bishop and aiming at the rook. So what should be played now? A capture by the knight. So hopefully you found that. Then we have a recapture with the rook, which keeps the knight centralized, because here the rook, even though it moved to the edge of the board, it still can cover from a distance all this, all the squares across the center and towards the other side of the board, whereas the knight is limited if it moves to the edge. All right, so the pawn was under attack, so b6 is played, protecting that pawn. And white continues with this move, attacking the bishop and possibly threatening to jump forward and attack the rook. So what should Steinitz do here? See if you can figure it out. All right. He ignores that threat and repositions his knight into the center. So now we have an attack on this knight, and the knight jumps up even further, attacking this pawn, which is protected by the king at the moment, but just positioning this knight to aid in a kingside attack. And so white counterattacks over here, which the computer says is an inaccuracy, but he attacks the rook. The rook jumps up into the center of the board here, eyeing this knight, which is only protected by the queen, but now the rook and the queen are attacking. So we have this move, a blocking move, blocking the queen's attack here. Now the queen jumps over here to the king side, threatening a mate in one. So we have this move to prevent that mate in one on queen to h2. So the knight is under attack. What should Steinitz do now? See if you can guess. All right, the knight just retreats back. Nothing crazy. The knight retreats back towards the center, and of course not the edge, because from here the knight's still keeping an eye on this e4 square, eyeing the pawn. And the opponent responds with this tricky move, jumping the knight into the e5 square, where what this kind of poses a question to Steinitz. What should he do about this knight, if anything? So what would you do in this position? All right, see if you can find it. Okay, Steinitz ignores that knight, but now positions the rook here, lining up on the king and eyeing this pawn, which cannot be recaptured because of this pin on the king here. So we have this move, retreating the knight back and attacking the queen and helping to try and defend the king side. So what should Steinitz do here? All right, we have a capture of this pawn, which is made possible by the rook pinning the g pawn. And now the rook jumps up here to help guard, from a queen capturing here on g2 with a mate. Although the queen is guarding here, but the game continues with a capture here. So, hopefully you found that, but if you didn't, that's kind of a tricky move. So, we have capture of the knight. So Steinitz got a rook, or excuse me, a knight and a pawn and an attack on the king. Now the king's wide open by giving up his rook, but he also got that other pawn, so it's pretty even. Probably in Steinitz's advantage here, of course, because the king is just wide open and under attack. All right, so an attack on the queen here. And now, what should Steinitz do? Well, you probably found this move. He just checks. But will you be able to see the follow-up? So we have a block, and see if you can find the final winning move of the game. All right, well, hopefully you found this move, and white resigned here. So we can look at the game review and the analysis to find out why he resigned here. So if we do a quick game review, let's see here. So in this game, Steinitz played with 94.6% accuracy versus 86.4% by Mikhail Chigorin. Steinitz had 2 great moves and only 1 mistake, but his opponent had 3 inaccuracies and 2 misses. So here, well, let me go to the analysis. It says that the game may have continued with capture, but now the queen can just be picked off with check, and that also forks the king and the knight. So, the king would be forced to move, and then you just pick off this knight, and we have a queen, bishop, and knight versus 2 rooks, and that's more than enough material to win the game. So we could do a quick analysis here. Let me turn on the evaluation if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the moves. So we had e4, e5. Let's see, knight to f3, attacking the pawn, knight to c6, defending, and then bishop to c4, the Italian game, which aims at this weak f pawn, which is only protected by the king. So Steinitz does the same. And this is the Giocco piano game, the quiet game, variation in the Italian game. And so this, the Evans Gambit, you give up this b pawn, which is captured, and now you can push the c pawn, attacking the bishop and driving the bishop back. But this also, after you castle here, you're able to push this pawn forward, the d pawn, and it's backed up by the c pawn. So Steinitz just fortifies the central e pawn, and we have this pawn push. So that is ignored in favor of development. And at this point, it looks like black is ahead because he has that pawn. But even though he's a whole pawn ahead, it's only a 0.17 advantage. All right, so the computer gives developing the knight as a better move. And here, let's see, bishop to b5 is played, although the computer actually likes bishop to d5 better. All right, so now we have e takes d4. Looks like that is the move the computer recommends. So in the game, that's exactly what we had. But now it's saying knight to e7 would have been better. So capture, now we have a strong central pawn formation. And looks like knight to e7 would be best here. But we have this retreat, a mistake by Steinitz, which, he was probably worried about this pawn pushing forward and pinning. The knight is pinned to the king, so he wanted to break this pin of the knight to the king. But it looks like the best move would have been to just go there. And now d5 is the best. The knight is pinned to the king, but it looks like you're able to counterattack here. And so now what do you do? Looks like you want to keep your bishop pair, and retreating is best. But this allows, let's see, bishop captures, attacking the queen, queen captures, and now b5, and then capturing, and now these pawns are kind of wrecked here. And then queen to d1, going after that pawn. And not capturing with the knight, because then the queen could move here and threaten to fork the bishop and the knight if this knight captures here immediately. So it looks like queen to b8 is the recommended move. But now it's saying that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to just go ahead and castle. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, now it's saying it would be better just to castle. So the queen can swoop in here. And now this forces your bishop to retreat. And then what? Bishop to g5, pinning the knight. f6, chasing that bishop away. And anyway, you get the picture. I'm going a little bit too far into this variation. Okay. Let's see here. So bishop is developed. The knight is developed. This is an inaccuracy. It looks like d5 would have been better to just attack the knight. The knight would go to e5. We'd have an exchange of bishops. And the knight recapturing. Knight captures. So Steinitz probably wanted to avoid all these exchanges. It looks like capturing that way is even better. Because the bishop is lined up here. So what do you do now? Bishop to a3, preventing the king from castling. And now it looks like queen to f6, but you could possibly castle queen side, but that's a pretty open king side, or sorry, queen side if you castle that way. I mean, I guess the bishop could drop back here and help defend, but still. And now they recommend that move. All right, anyway, in the game, we had knight to a3. The knight captures the free pawn. Looks like knight to c4 is best here. But we had this attack. And the knight retreats to e7. So queen jumps in here. That's a miss. Better would have been to go ahead and capture, it looks like. Or now it's saying queen to d4. So let's see. It did recommend that move, but now it's thinking it wants queen to d4 instead. Something like that. Lining up on the king side. Oh, and attacking the knight. So, the knight would have to go here. All right, so after knight to a3, the knight captures. This pawn attacks. We have a retreat. And it looks like it would have been better to go ahead and capture here. But now you have rook to g8. The bishop retreating back to d3. And then... oh, the bishop, I mentioned that earlier. The bishop can't move up here because of this pin. So looks like you're better off to just do that, capture, then chase that knight, and then we have what, knight to a3 again, and then b5. Huh, interesting stuff. Okay, let me turn on a light here. All right, it's starting to get dark. Okay, in the game we had queen to a4, but it says, that's a miss. It would have been better to pick off this pawn, but maybe Chigorin didn't want to have an opening, half open file up towards his king side there. So now the game continued with this move, a great move by Steinitz, stopping this bishop's attack down the diagonal there. And rook at a to b1 was played. But it looks like it's better to just move here and attack the knight. So then, let's see. Bishop takes b5. Oh, now it doesn't like that move. It's saying, well, what happens there? Knight to c5 is better. It's better to attack the queen. And then we would have that. And here it does not like a capture here. Huh. It says if you capture here, then the advantage goes to white. So it's better to retreat back. And then once that is done, now we have bishop captures and knight. Oh my gosh, knight captures. What? That is crazy. Let's go back there. Your queen is under attack, so should you just retreat back that way? Queen to c2. Man, it says it's better to just go ahead and do that. Give up your queen. And then bishop takes a4. Oh, man. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. I guess you end up with 3 pieces for the queen, but you keep your bishop pair. So that would be a pretty crazy, unbalanced game if that happened. All right, back to the game. We have a protecting move of this bishop. So capture, rook captures. The knight jumps over here attacking the queen. A centralization of the queen, although it would have been better to move here and put pressure on this G pawn. So castle, bishop moves here, I guess keeping an eye on this pawn. Then the knight attacks the queen retreats. Steinitz develops his queen, bishop repositioning, and now Steinitz goes to take control of this open E file. So here, it looks like the computer wanted that move, but instead that knight retreats. But at this point, it's almost 2 points in Steinitz's favor. Now he's gaining control of this open file. Bishop retreats back. Knight to h4. The rook attacks here, forcing this knight to make a decision, but the knight just repositions. And now we have an attack on the rook. And the rook stays in the center, which is the best move. And now what? Looks like b5 is recommended. But instead, Steinitz tries to centralize this bishop. And we have this move, avoiding the trade with the bishop. But now the knight captures, pulling the rook over here. and b6 to protect this pawn. All right. This knight centralizes, attacks the bishop, threatens to jump in here and attack the rook. So now Steinitz centralizes his knight. We have an attack on the knight. The knight jumps up to the king side, but this knight jumps in here attacking the rook. And it looks like h3 would have been better to just drive this knight back. Or, I don't know, maybe send the knight forward. Let's see what would have happened there. So if we had h3, then it looks like knight to e3, and then the knight jumps in here to c6, like that. And then we have knight just picks off the rook. All right, well, why would he do that then? What if, if he jumps forward, what if he moves that rook? Rook to c1. Well, it looks like that's not as good as letting them capture the rook. All right, in the game, this move is made. The rook jumps up in here to avoid being captured. And now we have another rook centralizing because we had a queen and a rook piling up on the knight. So this blocks the scope of the queen. And now the queen jumps over here and starts the attack on the king side. So the knight is attacked, and this also avoids a mate in 1 on h2. So the knight retreats, and this knight makes a pretty good move here, but at this point it's too late. Steinitz is already winning. And the best move here is rook takes h3. So, I guess we could take a look at that. Rook takes h3, capture, and then, let's see, capture the knight. F-pawn captures with a discovered attack on your bishop, and your knight is under attack. Queen to g3. Queen to g2. And, oh man, yeah, this is crazy. The queen could capture here on e5, but it looks like an even better move is to capture over here, taking the knight, and you're threatening to capture this rook with check. So the best move is, oh man, moving. Okay, this makes sense. Moving here, and bishop takes h3, attacking the queen, queen to f3, and queen takes e5. Yeah, so this is really crazy, tricky stuff. I mean, Steinitz didn't even go into this line. Maybe he thought it was too wild. So instead, after this knight move by his opponent, Steinitz just moves here, pinning this pawn and threatening this pawn. So the game continues with the knight attacking the queen. The queen just picks off the pawn, which is possible because this one is pinned by the rook. So, what does his opponent do now? He's pretty much losing. So he gives up the rook for another pawn, and then the knight, and then an attack on the queen. But we have check, block, and now this move, the game-ending move. All right, well, interesting game. Remember to just go over these games and try and guess and calculate the moves actively instead of passively just going through the moves of the game. And you'll learn a lot more by doing that and trying to figure the game moves out yourself. All right, well, leave any comments, suggestions. Please like and subscribe for those that haven't. And feel free to send in a request in your comments if there's anything you'd like to see. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.